God's grace, mercy, and peace are yours in Jesus Christ. There's an outline if you want to follow along and track along with that. Well, of course, it'll be up here on the screen. Abram, a little confusing. Rosie, thanks. Good work. It's always tricky, isn't it? Abraham, when do we say what? So I just have to comment again. What a joy this has been for Chris and for me the last 2 Sundays. So we had 2 baptisms at 11, this service last week. Then I had one in the afternoon over. I did it over at Gate City because they wanted to be dunked, right? Go in there. The heater was off. The heater didn't work. It was cold, baby. But we were wide awake. And then 2 this morning at 8:30. Just so neat, just to see that. Isn't that? We should cheer for God for that. That we've had 5 baptisms in just these 2 weeks, just across the board. So we praise God for that. So if you're joining us online, welcome. We're delighted you're here. If you're at one of our assisted living, especially over there at Grace, we're grateful that you're here and have a chance to watch. And so you can catch Bible studies and you can catch other sermons and other messages and so forth like that online. So here's what I'm doing today. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to walk through people called by name. And so here's Abram, who gets his name changed by God to Abraham, that ironic name because he's 75, then he's ultimately 99, doesn't have kids. How can he possibly be the father of nations? So I don't do this often, but I'm doing this a little bit as a Bible study. I have an ulterior motive because I'm wanting you all to attend Bible class. That's what I want. So I don't lay Lutheran guilt on people very often, but it's great. I'm telling you, I'm on a high here because we must have had 75 people in Bible class this morning. It's like standing room only. So it was really great. So I'm doing the Gospel according to John. What a powerful one that one is. And Chris is doing 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And Aaron is helping us both out. Aaron Hayes is helping us out. He's a wealth of great knowledge. And then Jessica Perry is leading on the Sermon on the Mount. And so I just want to commend that to you because what you're going to hear now for a bit is a little bit in the style of a Bible study. I want you to see this in this way. So let's go to this. And if you have a Bible and you want to follow along, Abraham really starts at the very end of chapter 11. Chapter 12 is the call of Abraham. 15, 17, you get those powerful stories where Abram raises an army. He rescues his nephew Lot, and they decide, this kind of thing. And then you have Sodom and Gomorrah and that whole story, and he pleads for people. And then you have the story of Abraham and Isaac, ultimately. And so we're going to go and look at those. See, there's my little pointer. It's hard to see a little bit, but this, I want you to see what kind of story this is, because this is a story of a journey of faith. It's a journey of faith. You're going to get something different next week with Moses because God calls Moses and then Moses argues with God. He argues with God. We've never done that, of course, right? And Abraham, his is a great story because his faith, it's a story of great faith, but it's fits and starts, man. It's fits and starts. He makes some boneheaded moves along the way and does not trust God, and it gets irritated with God, and God is the one who remains faithful. And you see Abraham's faith mature and grow. And that scene with Isaac, while it's one of the most kind of terrifying, strange moments in the Bible where God says, okay, you've waited till you're 100 years old to have a kid, now I want you to go sacrifice him to me. How can that be? Right? How can that be? And yet you see some things in Abraham that were not there before as he's on this journey of faith. But here's where his journey starts. So this is where Jerusalem is. Egypt is over here, right? So you got yourself oriented a little bit. This is now over here. This is what we would call Iraq, right? So this is the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, those 2 rivers. So this was Babylon. It becomes Babylon currently in the modern age. See, there's Babylon. It's Iraq. Abram lives here in Ur of the Chaldees. The Babylonians were called the Chaldeans. So he's there, and he is pagan. He worships all the local gods and goddesses. He's What else would he do? People often forget about this. People often think, well, if it's in the Bible, they probably had a book to reference. No book. There's no book. There's no religion. They don't have religion. They don't have a temple. There's nothing. God just comes to Abram and says, I want you. I'm going to make a people out of you. This busted, broken up, crazy, messed up world, I'm going to bless it through you. That's how I'm going to do this. Now, you can argue with God on his methodologies, okay? But that's how God said how he's going to do it. I'm going to do it this way. You see, God had promised, hadn't he, to Adam and Eve when they blew it, right? You had one thing, guys. So you ate from the tree, you disobeyed God, death enters the world, and God says, I love you so much, I'm going to make a way. I'm going to find a way to heal, redeem, restore. I'm going to find a way. And that promise in Genesis 3 says, and I will put, he's cursing the serpent. Do you remember this? He's cursing the serpent. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, right? I'll put between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers, right? So the demon world and humanity. And then he switches to, and he says, he, singular male pronoun, he will crush your head, Satan. He will crush you, and you will strike his heel. So then the question is, how's God going to do that? Here comes Abraham. So here's Abram, false gods, all kinds of idolatry, paganism, and out of that, God calls and says, I need you to pack everything up, and you're going to go. This is what's so crazy. I'm going to go to a land I will show you. Like, it would be one thing if God said to me, okay, I'm going to want you to move to Texas. Sorry. I'm going to want you to move to, okay, I don't know, Texas. So I go, and if God said, well, I want you to move to San Antonio. Okay, I can research that. I can check that out. What does God say? I want you to pack everything up, and you're going to go to a land that I will show you. What land is that, Lord? Do I need to bring winter clothes? How do I prepare for this? What can I look forward to? I've just got to trust you on this. And of course, that's the recurring theme, right? That's the recurring theme. So what he does is he packs up all his family. And from what we know, he's a pretty wealthy guy. He's acquired a lot of stuff. We don't know what his situation was there. We didn't know if he got along with his neighbors or if there was family strife. We don't know. We don't know if there was war or famine or whatever. All we know is Abraham is here. Abram is here. God says, go here. Go this way. So he takes off. You can't go this way. You know that, right? You're dead if you reach this little 50-mile mark here, right? You're dead by there. That's just sand, okay? So you follow the rivers. If you remember your world history, this is called the Fertile Crescent. And you go up this way, and there it is, Haran. He stops. So that's where he parks until his father dies. And then at age 75, he's then invited by God to go down into the land of Canaan. And so let's go to a couple more maps. You can maybe see it a little bit better here. So this one is a little easier to see. He starts here in Ur, goes to Haran, comes down into Canaan, stops right around there in Shechem. Let's go to the next one. So Abram in his journey of faith, one of the side trips he makes is he heads into Egypt. This happens a fair amount of time for the Israelites and for the people in Canaan for a couple of reasons. One was Canaan was a spot. This is really almost, I say it like it's funny. It ain't funny for the people that live there. But the big honchos like Egypt and Syria and Babylon, they didn't want to mess up their own countries. They said, hey, we got a bone to pick with you. Let's meet in Canaan. We'll fight there. And so they would go there and have these fights in the plain of Megiddo, where we get Armageddon, that word, the plain of Megiddo, and they would fight there. And then they would go back, and they would haul off slaves, Canaanites, and ultimately Israelites and people like that. So periodically, not just wars, but then famine and starvation and drought, those things would happen. And over here you have the Nile Delta. Egypt was a particularly blessed country in that they regularly were kind of the breadbasket of that Eastern world. And we know that from later stories. Joseph invites his brothers and father to come down when they're going through famine, and they end up living then in Egypt. So there's a time when Abram goes over to Egypt, and he just blows it. He lies about his wife, and his wife ends up in Pharaoh's household. It's bad. It's a major epic fail on his part. God corrects him. And then here's another scene here. And so by the time Abram moves into Israel, into Canaan, it's not called Israel, into Canaan, he owns no land. And God says, this is the land I'm going to give you. From up here, like by Mount Hermon, all the way down to the Negev, all the way over to the Red Sea, I'm going to give you that land. By the time Abraham dies, he owns a cemetery plot. That is all he owns. And he had to haggle for that. So when Sarah passes, he puts her remains there, and then ultimately when Abram dies, he's laid to rest there too. And along the way, he wanders all over. He's a nomad. He has sheep and herds and flocks and herds and things like sheep. He has those things, and he's just a nomad, wanders from place to place, has no home, has no land to call his own, and yet God had made a promise. That's a recurring theme here. Abraham doesn't have what God promised, and yet he remains faithful. So this thing here, he finally does get a son, Isaac, and then God tells him, I want you to sacrifice your son. It's the craziest thing. I get it theologically and all. I get it. Like, what's that line in the reading, Rosie? What was that one in the third one? On this mountain the Lord will provide. Isn't that how it ends? Right? So check this out. Mount Moriah, do you know what that is? Mount Moriah today is recognized, especially by Jewish people, as the Temple Mount. And the Temple Mount is the same spot, right in that same area, right in that same spot where Jesus was crucified. So now, think about what those words in Genesis mean. On this mountain, the Lord will provide a Savior. So God was foreshadowing all of that. All of that. How would he keep his promise in Genesis? How would he keep his promise to Abraham? How would he preserve Abraham's son Isaac? Because the only one who ever asked for his own, who required his own son to be sacrificed was God himself. Isn't that language reminiscent, right? Take your son, your only son, the one whom you love, and sacrifice him to me. You can see God saying this to Abraham with a catch in his own voice, can't you? As my son, the one I love, is given for you. God knows all along, and you're going to have a point of this in this outline. God acts first. This is already acted on. God has already acted on it. He already knows what Jesus is going to do as he asks Abraham to bring Isaac to that mountain. And on this mountain, the Lord will provide. So this is kind of what we do in Bible study. And so we like to show these things, background. And what's nice about Bible study is you get to talk back. I suppose if you talked to me, I would answer. But then I would probably say, okay, that's enough, let's talk later. But seriously, and in Bible study, it's so neat because you can stop and ask questions. We can explore things more deeply. So anyway, I commend it to you. Let's click on, if we can, Heather, and go on into the outline here. So these are the scriptures that I have that tie into it. I may have you click back to these in a little bit. Let's go to the outline. So here's the first thing. There's 4 things I want you to hear from this. And let me just mention something real quick. Keep me in prayer today if you would. I have to drive to Boise and back today because there's an installation of a DCE. DCE means Director of Christian Education. Ryan is one. My wife Teresa is one. Christina Parker is another. They're DCEs. I'll talk about it a little bit later, about being called. So he's being installed in Eagle, Friendship Celebration. So I got to get over there in time for that. So keep me in. So if I'm not here for you with communion, I'm going to ask for your apologies and be patient with Chris. So point number 1. So what can we learn from Abraham, as we talk about being called by name? So here's the first thing. God calls us out. We don't know exactly. I mean, clearly with Abram, God was calling him out of paganism, out of false religion, out of idolatry, clearly. We don't know if there were other things. We don't know if there was strife in family. We don't know if he was going through economic hardship. We don't know. But certainly we know he was calling him out of false religion to true religion, out of falsehood to truth. And this would be my law point, my challenge to all of us, because I got to ask myself the question too. Look at what he says, leave your country. Now, certainly I'm not talking about the United States or whatever your native land is or whatever. I'm not talking about that. But is there a country that you need to leave? And what I mean by that, a condition, a state, an attitude. Is there something that God might be asking you to leave behind? That's what's happening to Abram, and it's a story of faith throughout the Bible where God calls people out of something. That's one thing. I don't know the answer to that. I know those things as I reflect for me. Sometimes it's hurts or it's things that I have not reconciled. I got to leave that place. It doesn't mean I leave that person in the dust, but I can't live in that spot. It might be a loss or a tragedy. I can't live in that spot. It will destroy me. Or if I'm holding on to something that I know is not jiving with God's goodwill for me, I need to leave that country. So that would be my first challenge to us, that this is part of that journey of faith for Abram. Do we need to leave a country in order to get, please, you get what I'm saying? I'm not saying to leave the U.S. You with me? Got me? Okay. Second point is this. God is also calling us to. Now, this is really my illustration. You may or may not know this about our denomination, our church body, this Lutheran church that's based in Missouri, headquarters in Missouri. So we have a bunch of colleges and universities and seminaries around the country, like 9 altogether. And so people who graduate from those who have trained to be teachers or DCEs, what we just talked about, or pastors, can be called by a congregation. So you called me. I was serving a congregation in Portland, and you called me to be your pastor. You prayed about it. You met. You took the bottom of the barrel. You said, let's see if he'll come. And so, but I receive a document, right? I get a document. And it says, after much prayer and in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, we ask you to prayerfully consider accepting this call. We believe God has led us to invite you to come. Those documents, my daughter has one, Jared has one, Chris has one, like Mrs. Bo, Mrs. Krause. I mean, there's a number of people who are in that spot. I've often counseled with people in my role in our denomination when they get calls. They'll call me, what should I do? Or how should I approach this? And sometimes, that's probably happened 40 times over the years. And often people will say to me, my situation is terrible. I don't get paid enough. I can't support my family. My boss is a jerk. I'm keeping Chris's name quiet on that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not his boss. But they'll say those things, right? My ministry is not. I'm not excited about what I don't have support. This kind of thing. And I will always ask, well, but you have a call here. What are they proposing to you to do? And it's almost like when I hear them say, I don't care, I just got to get out of here. And if that's the case, I tell them desperately, please don't accept that. Because when a person just is trying to leave a bad situation but not go to something, it inevitably fails. And not just the person is disappointed, but the ministry that they go to is just really damaged. And so I always ask them, what's God calling you to? And I think that's important for us in our faith. If God is calling you out of something, you can trust this. He's also calling you to something. And so I think it's a valuable thing for me to be personally reflective. God, what country might you be calling me out of? What circumstance? What condition? What thing? are you asking for me to follow you in, to come out of, to separate myself from because it's damaging me and others? But what are you calling me to? And sometimes that's not always easy and evident to see. It wasn't for Abram, was it? He couldn't see it. I mean, there comes a point where he gets really frustrated with God. And you could hear it in the second reading. He goes, God, I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting for them kids you talked about. And if I die, all my stuff goes to the dude in Syria. I don't want it to go to him. I want it to go to my kids. I'm longing for you to keep, because the promise you made me is the promise I'm rejoicing in. But it's not happening. Ever happened to you? Right? God is providing hope and healing. He is promising those things, and you're sitting there in the midst of it going, I ain't there yet. And God is always saying, I'm there. I want you to get this, point number 3. God always acts first. When you see that story about Abraham and Isaac, what I love about that story is, and this is always hard, this makes your brain explode. This makes your brain explode. Because God is off the timeline, eternal being. As Abraham is agonizing, taking his son because God has commanded, can you imagine what his conversation with Sarah must have been like? Hey, where are you going? Oh, I'm going to kill our son. As God has asked him and put him in that terrible, terrible dilemma, he has already not just committed, but knows that the fulfillment of that promise will only happen in his own son. That's hard for us, isn't it? Man, that's hard. Because we live stuck here, stuck in this moment. God is not stuck. Please, please, people, be cheered on. Be encouraged. God is not stuck there. God is standing in that other spot, knowing completely and fully how he is going to accomplish his good and perfect will. He is longing for us simply to say, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. And so this third one, God always acts first. God already has the land in mind. God already has his descendant. He has Isaac in mind. He has Jacob in mind and the tribes of Israel. He has King David in mind and his descendants. He knows what family Messiah will come from. He knows how the nation will go through turmoil and loss and go into exile. He knows that in their restoration, he is going to provide the opportunity for them to see a Lord and Master far greater than the Romans or the Greeks or the Babylonians, and his name will be Jesus. He already stands there completed. If you're waiting for God to act, know that he already has. Already done. Your salvation is won. His promises are already kept. Oh, it's hard. I don't mean this to sound trite, because I have to remind myself of it all the time. Okay, Lord, I know you've already done that. Give me some faith here. Give me some faith to keep walking. To keep walking. Because on the last point, on the last one here, get my Bible turned around the right way. I want to read this chunk here also about, can you go back to those ones? So, wait. God's call is a call to faith. Ultimately, that's what his call is, about trust. Abraham is this tremendous example of trust. You know, it's funny, when you go in the Bible, like if I was to ask you, God bless you, when you walk through the New Testament, which of Jesus' miracles does he think is the best? Right? I mean, you got to think, feeds the 5,000. He's like, yes! Check that out. Did you see that? Did you see what I did? Or like Lazarus comes walking out of the room and Jesus goes, yeah, man, that's me. I did that. That's a great one. That's a good one. Top 5. Easy, top 5. No, he never does that, does he? When does Jesus get excited? Does he ever get excited about the miracles? He didn't get excited. What's he get excited about? He goes, did you see that faith? They believed And he just is celebrating. The greatest miracle in the Bible is always faith. And that's why we chose Abram, and we'll choose Moses, and we'll talk about Esther, and we'll talk about on and on, because the greatest example and miracles are faith. Here's how the author of Hebrews describes it. These are worthwhile verses to look at in chapter 11 of Hebrews. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land. Like a stranger in a foreign country, he lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. And here's the cool line. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father, because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. That's where his trust came. The one who made the promise, I can trust that one. And so from one man, and I love this line, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as stars in the sky, as countless sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. I use this example in my Bible classes periodically. When we talk about the end times, you know that all great saints and all the people of faith throughout the Bible, New Testament, you know this, I think, that they all believed that Jesus was returning, coming back in their lifetime. St. Paul believed it, and then you move on. John Calvin believed it. Martin Luther believed it. They all believed it. Were they stupid? Were they wrong? Okay, were they wrong? Okay, Jesus didn't return. But were they right to live by faith that way? That's the illustration. And so what he says is they didn't receive them. They saw them from a distance. So often we are so guilty of, God, I'll only believe you if I get what you promise. If you pay out, I'll pay back. And God has already paid out right there on the tree, on the cross, on the mountain where God will provide. That's our model of faith. That's his gift to you and to me. Amen.